Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. We're back with another exciting episode of Off the Comma, and our storytelling community just continues to grow. And we're so fortunate that so many people are showing up and bringing these really powerful and amazing stories to us all. And we all get to share in these stories. And this community is just continuing to grow. And I'm super proud of this. You know, we're going to be a year and a half or so at the holidays. And it's just so cool how far we've come and how just this whole experience is expanding. And so I'm kind of rambling, but I'm excited because this week we have another exciting guest who is new to me. So I'm going to get to meet her for the first time in our conversation today and hearing her story. Don't know anything about her story, so I'm looking forward to hearing it for the first time, like all of you will be, and learning more about her. And we have with us Michela Giordano Castro. And I'm excited to get to meet her and get into her story. So I'm going to shut up now. And Michela, why don't you kind of introduce yourself? Tell us, how would you like to be known? And then anything that you think would be important for us to know about you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Well, to describe myself just as a person, for starters, I do consider myself very empathetic. I'm a very enthusiastic person, get very excited about little things, other people's things, my own things. And I'm a very curious person as well. That's been the case since I was very little. My mom would call me the queen of questions. It was always why? And so what I do now is I'm a therapist, which is perfect. I get to listen to people ask questions, use my empathy and my curiosity. And what I also do now is spirituality coaching. So that's me in a professional sense and a personal sense, in short.
Okay. That's really cool for me that you are both a therapist and a coach. And it seems like your curiosity really centers around people and people's experiences and what makes people tick potentially. And I'm inserting a little of my own words here. So like throughout our conversation today, if I reflect something back that's not accurate or it's like, you know, doesn't land, by all means, correct me. These are just my reflections, but I'm definitely seeing your curiosity about people kind of showing up here.
You're absolutely right. I'm very curious about people, always thinking about like how, like you said, how do other people tick? What made them the way that they are? You know, what do they need to maybe become differently if that's what they're seeking? I'm always thinking about, you know, I wonder what they're feeling. I wonder what they're thinking, sometimes to a fault. So I'm working on that. But yes, absolutely very curious person about people specifically.
I was just having a conversation with someone this morning, and it's so true, right? Like therapists always have their own therapists, coaches always have their own coaches, because no matter what role you're in, you're also working on your own things too.
Always, never stops.
Yeah. How can you not if you are curious by nature, right? You can't not turn that on yourself, right?
Yeah, it's so true. I was just thinking about this yesterday after a post I saw talking about like, you know, we're so obsessed with finding ourselves. Is that good? Is that bad? And how, in my opinion, it's the greatest journey we can go on, but it's also a journey that never ends because
Mm.
we as people are always changing as well. But it's so rewarding to get to know ourselves and grow and learn and heal, all that good stuff.
I love that. And kind of self-referencing for a moment, it's like as an explorer by nature, I'm always kind of digging into the depths of myself and so forth. And then you kind of come to this realization that it's like, it's really not about the finding as much as it is the exploring. And if I ever did quote
Mhm.
unquote figure myself out, I would go and find something else to stir up so that I could continue the exploration.
That's so interesting that you have that awareness. I think that's so cool. For a lot of people, we get caught up in the focus on the destination that we forget that it's not
Mm.
about the destination, it's about the journey, because it's so true. We get to the destination and yet we're still unhappy. There's still something else we're like a part of us is wanting to seek out. So that's
Mm.
amazing.
Someone said in another conversation, I finally made it to the mountain and there was nothing there. Let's get into your story. I'm sidetracking us. Michela, in a minute, we'll get into the 5 questions, same 5 questions that I ask of every guest, and it'll kind of give you the framework to tell your story within. But with every guest, before we get to those questions, I like to start with one, which is as you look ahead to the next 45 minutes or so, in the telling of your story, what intention would you have for yourself today?
That's a very interesting question. What intention would I have for myself in telling my story? I think the first thing that comes to mind is to embrace the opportunity. I know as a therapist that being able to reflect and share is so rewarding, even to ourselves, let alone to sometimes the person we're speaking to. And so I think my intention for myself is, yeah, just
Mm.
further reflection, further processing, but I think it's a great opportunity to hit the highlights and for me myself to reflect on that and process that.
Thank you for sharing that. And you do highlight something that comes up a lot is kind of it's not just in the giving of the story, but sometimes the retelling of the story brings us
Mhm.
things. My intention for our conversation today is to support you in your intention and hold space for you to be able to accomplish that. And also, it's the same every episode, right? Is that in sharing your story with the world, that there are going to be people out there who will see a little bit of themselves in you and your story. It will make them feel a little less alone, a little bit more connected, and in the best of cases, even inspired and empowered to do something that they've been wanting to do to kind of get themselves off the comma. So
Mm, that does absolutely apply, and you'll see as I tell you about myself.
wonderful. Well, then let's just get right into it because I'll ramble and get us off track here. So let's start with the first question. Michela, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Well, it relates two situations in my life, two really um, significant points in which I found myself on a comma. The first was when I actually lost my religion and I lost my connection and identity in spirituality along with that. When I was just entering adulthood, I was 18, just about to leave for college. And then, another comma that has led me to where I am now as a spirituality coach was, 10 years after that, finding myself reconnected to spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, to start with the first, I at 18 years old came to a point where I could no longer choose to believe. You know, for many years, it wasn't a choice. It was just who I was. I was a very religious person. There's a lot of talk in many religious communities of like, it's not about religion, it's about relationship. And I did identify with that. And at the same time, I was raised in a very conservative, a very fundamentalist community.
Mm.
I was homeschooled. I did go out of the home for some classes, but everyone that I was interacting with for these like co-op classes is how they were called, were also very fundamentalist, religious people. And I was taught that this was the right way, this was truth, and also that anything outside of that, anything that doesn't align with that, was not truth, like was bad and wrong and would steer you away from God. In my religion, they were also really big on, without full faith in Jesus, you are going to hell if you don't believe he is Lord, and you don't ask to be forgiven of your sins, all those different things. So it was this interesting combination for me of a lot of love and a lot of relationship, so to speak, with my spirituality and my religion. And there was that fundamentalist piece. The community that I was in my high school years was also really big on training us to be involved in government. We were very much taught to believe that this is a Christian nation and we needed to be as involved as possible to ensure that all the laws, align with biblical values.
Mm.
So although, looking back, and especially for who I am now and where I am now and all the experiences I've had and people I've met, I'll speak for myself. It seems very extreme, very intense, and in many ways it was. But for me, living that, I felt a lot of joy, a lot of purpose, a lot of connection. Honestly, not a ton with the community itself. I was more of like an awkward kid. So it wasn't like I had this great, connection to all the people in my community, but I just felt like I was doing the right thing. I was in the right place. And there was a lot of security that came with that, a lot of sense of security to know or to believe that I've got it right. I'm on the right path. I have the truth. Unfortunately, everyone else doesn't, but I can feel good knowing that I have the truth. So then, as different things happened in my life, in fact, I'll share this real quick. So like I said, within religion and spirituality, for me, it really was personal. It wasn't just because it was my parents' choice and how they raised us. I mean, it was at first, but then early in my tween years, like I had my own spiritual revolution. I don't know what you want to call it. And I felt like on fire for God. I was always reading my Bible. I wanted to live for God, all these different things. And my dad, he is very spiritual. Growing up, he was very religious. And at one point, my dad is from Sicily. And for a few years, we lived in Sicily for him to lead the church there, to try to grow the church, try to grow, again, the idea of the message of salvation and all of that. And then even while we lived in the States, he was always seeking the truth. We had, again, this very firm belief that there is truth is out there, and it's our job to find it. That's what God wants of us. He wants us to live a particular way. So we were seeking to figure out what that was. And so within that, even within spirituality and religion specifically, several shifts happened. We went from going to a particular church all my life. We went to Italy. When we came back, we continued at that same church. Then we came to a point where, through his studies of the Bible, he began to believe that home church was best. So then there was, a little bit more isolation, even more so with that. We were just doing church at home. We did connect with other families that also believed in home church. So sometimes we would get together in homes. And then there came a point where he became a Messianic Jew. So believing that, yes, Jesus is Lord, and the belief that God never asked us not to follow the Old Testament and all the things that, the Jews are asked to do. And in all these transitions, I was never like, oh, Daddy says this, so I'm going to do it. I'm on board. No, I was always, challenging him. I have a pretty good relationship with my dad. Actually, it's very good, considering everything. And yeah, I had no fear to challenge him again, well, I don't think I said this, but in my homeschool classes, there was a very particular curriculum that we followed that literally is presented as teaching young adults, young teens, whatever, the history of the world, literature, apologetics, debate, writing, all these topics through the lens of a biblical worldview. And so I was literally conditioned to believe not only that everything I was taught was true, but how to defend it and why to believe it was true. So I was really, really deeply convinced that, I was on the right path. So anytime, even though these weren't great, huge shifts, it was just like from church to home, and then from like that to a different kind of church, synagogue, whatever. I would ask him questions. I would need to see the evidence, and eventually I would understand and I would be on board. And there was one day when I was 16 where it was a Saturday, so that was the Sabbath. And on my own, because again, this was all personal to me, I had decided for myself that every Sabbath I would only engage with things relating to God, because I wanted to take the day as an opportunity to get closer to God. And I would fast and all these different things. And my dad, again, he was a preacher and he's Italian, so he loves to talk. And it was nothing new for him to be, given one of his little lectures in the living room. And I remember this day, I left my bedroom and I went in there and I saw him talking to my mom. And I just sat down and started listening, like, okay, what are they talking about? And I got the gist that he was saying that God isn't real, that it's like all a trick made up, this kind of thing. And I literally could not believe my ears. I was so thrown off. I was so confused. After everything, my entire life, I never considered that my dad would stop believing in God. So that was like the first introduction to things. But even then, like for years, I would fight him on it. I would use all the techniques I was given in the 4-year course I was in through those homeschool classes of, how to defend the faith and, all these different things. But eventually, that it planted that seed of doubt. And even outside of our conversations, just my experiences, just with that door cracked open of actually being open to considering that maybe I don't have all of the answers. Maybe this isn't full truth. That led me to the point where I did decide for myself, I can't do this anymore. I'm just having to admit this isn't who I am anymore.
Can I step in and reflect something for a moment? Yeah. So first of all, and thank you for sharing this story. I mean, there's so much here, and just a couple of things, and obviously correct me where I'm off, but you've grown up in this faith. Obviously you're young now, so you're being exposed to what you're being given, right? There's not a whole world's worth of experiences to allow you to come to your own decisions, nor would anybody expect that to be the case. You're presented with this faith, this belief system, this religion, and you adopt it because it's coming from people that love and trust. And you've really kind of gone all in on it. And I hear you describe, I went all in, and yet I also challenged, but like, it sounds like even the challenging was in a way to make sure that your belief was solid. That's the part I'm not sure if that's true or not, but you've built this whole system and had it built for you, around you, of belief. And as modeled by your father, and now the very person that you've been following his lead and his prompt has now said, and this may not be the case. Like, I just wanted to reflect and acknowledge you for that, because that is a huge thing.
Thank you. Yeah, it is absolutely true that I was always pushing back to what I didn't understand. Again, I'm a very curious person, and I I was, I sometimes kind of wonder like how much I would value this if it wasn't instilled in me. And I might have the answer because nowadays I'm not a stickler for truth.
Mm.
I value it, but I don't see it as tangible and attainable as I was taught that it was. But I was extremely, it was like number one on my list of values was truth
Mhm.
when I was, around that age. And so, yeah, I would challenge because I wanted to know the truth and understand. And if I didn't understand, I wouldn't accept it. But then when it came to, those several years between that day, which it was a huge, it definitely shook me up a lot because it was just so shocking to hear him say that not just God might not be real, but God's not real. And we need to stop this. Otherwise, you're dumb kind of kind of a
Mhm.
message.
Mhm.
Um, the years after that, as I tried to, honestly, I did try to stay firm in my faith because I thought I had so many reasons to know that it was true. But ultimately, I did want what was true. However, emotions did get in the way. There was a lot of fear about really, really allowing myself to move past my religion and my faith
Mhm.
because another part of my upbringing in the church is constantly hearing the message that it's through God that you are happy. It's through God that you find joy, that you can be safe, that you can feel supported. And so I thought if I let this go, I'm going to be navigating life without as much happiness as I could have, without feeling safe, without feeling supported. So even, though there were times where I did start to think, maybe this isn't true, a part of me still wanted to stay in it anyway
Mhm.
because I was so afraid. But
Mhm.
as I continued to sit with that and continue to see how, as I did start to enter, real life, not just being at home, going to church and going to the grocery store, as is the life of a homeschooler a lot of the time,
Yeah.
I began to recognize that I had to let it go. I couldn't fool myself. Deep down, I didn't want that. Again, I do value what's real and I'm curious and all of that. But there was resistance because of so much fear that was instilled in me.
Mm. I- If I may, like, it keeps coming up for me. I don't have this exact life experience. I have something that's kind of similar, and it doesn't matter. But like what you're describing is almost like this kind of ground shaking, truth shattering experience that someone who finds out at that same age for the first time that they're adopted.
Mm,
Like it's not just the revelation of it all, but it's the separation from the truth that you knew. And what I assume it must be like to when you find yourself in moments where you're not thinking about it and you have a fond memory or you think about a certain thing and then you're kind of rattled to realize it's like, wait a minute, no, that's different now because that's not based on the same reality that I used to think it was based on.
hmm Yeah, that comparison or that analogy of it being like someone, you know, leaving childhood, entering adulthood, and figuring out that they were adopted. I hadn't thought of it like that, but it really hit home really hard because again, when you're that deep into it, it's your identity and you
Mm-hmm.
believe it to be totally true. And again, not only that, but I was in a community that made it your literal worldview. So it's like living every day with these tinted glasses on, and then suddenly you take them off and realize what you were seeing all along wasn't actually there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you said something else that I think I lost.
We were kind of talking about just the analogy, the comparison of like it must be as disorienting for the same reason you just described, the attachment to the identity as finding out that you were adopted. Like now your truth is no longer the same. Like you go through moments of,
the
things feeling kind of
memories.
normal. Yeah. The memories come back and now the
Mhm.
memories are redefined.
Mhm. Yeah. So before I touch on the memories, the other thing I want to just mention there is that, I mean, obviously, I don't know what it's like to find out that I was adopted. I know that's not the case for me, but as I would imagine it would be for someone in that position, it was extremely painful, and there was so much grief involved with that, allowing myself to close that door and crack open a new one. So yeah, it wasn't an easy, exciting decision or anything close to that.
Right.
But yeah, as far as memories, like I said, it was 10 years after that until I reconnected with spirituality outside of religion, which is what I'm really passionate about supporting people with now, especially with a religious history or religious trauma. For the longest time, I would get very triggered by those memories because I think I still wasn't, as healed from the pain of losing the benefits that I experienced. As I've again been in the world and met people, there are so many people who are no longer in religion that look back on religion with a lot of pain and a lot of bitterness. And I do not blame them. They have absolute right for that because of their experiences. But my experience was different. It was, my pain and bitterness came from leaving that, and then from the feelings that I would face of people who didn't understand, and hearing people's continued doctrine of people like me are lost or going to hell or foolish or just avoid it and don't want to know the truth, or they just want to sin, or all these different ways of presenting people who aren't in the faith would really bother me in the past. Now I'm just like, okay, whatever. Yeah.
Can I step in for just a moment?
Yeah.
And in a minute, we'll go to the second question, which I think will be kind of a natural evolution of your story too. But you said something that I think is interesting. And in every episode, there's an opportunity for us to go one layer deeper into your story, because there's things that we can hear you say and we can kind of identify with. And I feel like sometimes we're making assumptions. It's like, yeah, I know what that means. Kind of like when you watch TV, right? But when you said the pain of losing the benefits that I experienced, I think this is the opportunity for us to go a little deeper and help people understand, given everything that you've shared with us, what do you mean when you say the benefits that I experience? I think I know where you're going, but I'd love for you to explain that.
Yeah. So again, for me and my experience with religion, I didn't face the abuse or the fear mongering that a lot of people, unfortunately, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people do face in religion who have left. Instead, my experience was I have direct connection. Maybe I can't see or hear him, but I can talk to and emotionally connect with the God of the universe anytime that I want. And, he loves me so much that I can't even imagine it. And I can trust that he has a plan for me and that he's going to support me and that he's going to guide me. And that feels really great. It also felt great to believe that I knew the truth of the world, that this is why we're here. We're here to bring glory to God. We're here to help save his other beloved children from abandoning him and choosing a path that would cause them to be separated from him. It's weird looking back, because although I was raised to believe in hell, and I did, I was never super caught up with the idea of hell. I did feel a pull to use my life to be a missionary. I'd also considered like being a Christian counselor, but I knew I wanted to help people. And I knew that within that faith, it did involve bringing them closer to God. But that's also because not only regarding the afterlife, but I was taught so much and believed it was my experience. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I believed it was my experience, even though looking back, I recognize it wasn't. But this teaching that through living your life according to what God says in the Bible is how you have the best and happiest life. And so that felt great too. Like, I know I'm on the path, not just for all these, heaven or love with God and all of that, but the actual best way of living here on earth.
Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing you described, and I've talked to other people who have had experiences of growing up within a faith or a religion and them choosing a different path, right? What I'm hearing you kind of explain to us is that in your case, you, unlike some people who would say, I was skeptical, I had bad experiences, even you acknowledged other people who have had very different experiences, right? You had a connection with and were receiving benefits from, like, your experience was positive. You didn't necessarily, you don't really describe being in a place where you were questioning or challenging, and you were actually gaining things from your relationship with God, with the faith. You had a family that was nurturing and supportive. So that's a different experience to describe than someone who grew up in a faith and had a difficult time in it. And then when they cracked the door open, they were like, yes, confirmed, validated, and going on. You're describing a situation where this was all working very much for you and you were very connected to it. And now you're being sort of forced to question it. That's just, I just want to acknowledge that's a different experience than a lot of people might describe.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And that's a big reason why I felt that it's important to be open about my experience. And, it's so interesting because when I left the faith, I I left my, homeschooled conservative environment and went straight into a extremely conservative religious university where, you know, opposite genders couldn't visit each other's dorms. You had to go to chapel every day. You had to take Bible every semester. If you were caught having drank or use drugs or smoke or have sex, you're kicked out. And so I was still in a very religious environment. And all my family on both sides, like I said, my dad's Sicilian. He has a really big family over there. They're all deep into the faith. And my family here in the States are all Christian. So to be honest, up until I decided to go public after actually reconnecting to spirituality, I was in the closet about it. I would share things on my social media and stuff that reflected my new values that I developed over time. But I was never open in any way, shape, or form about not being religious anymore. And I remember this one day, a woman who was actually she was a youth leader when I was in middle school at church. She messaged me because of one of my posts and was basically saying, like, how could you believe this if, when Jesus says this or something along those lines. And since we were speaking in direct messenger, I haven't seen her in 15 years, or I don't know what it was. I told her, well, that's not where I base my values anymore. I think I even said I'm not Christian. And I remember she commented on that post publicly about, like, I wouldn't have even commented if I knew you were Christian, something like that. And I got worked up about that. I'm like, oh my God, she outed me about this. Now, not that everyone on my friends list would have seen that comment, but it was unsettling. But it's true, I had a very positive experience, and I think that may have also made it hard to be open about. If I did face abuse, maybe I would feel more empowered to be open about it and before, like, earlier on. But no, that's also what made it so hard for me to leave.
Mm. And it seems like also because it was like you had the moment of the door opening as you described, and sort of a little bit of like a questioning moment. Now let me be more curious about what I don't know, what I haven't learned, and that sort of thing. And it seems like that also kind of explains what you just described, right? Which is, and it's very easy to be kind of pulled back in, or it's very easy to feel chastised or corrected if I try to spread my wings with a different point of view or a different belief system. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like when I left the faith and I went to this Christian university, I still believed that the Bible gives us guidance to have the best life possible because that was the evidence I was going off of. I
Mm-hmm.
just could no longer believe that the Bible was the word of God, and in turn that God is what exists. And another thing that led me there to that conclusion was actually being in a non-Christian country for the first time in my life. I mean, I think so many places, even if, again, we're not maybe always considered like spiritual nations or religious nations, but there's like a majority of a certain religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd done a fair amount of traveling already, but we had a layover one time when going to visit family in Italy. And the layover was in Istanbul, Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the first time, I wasn't in a country that was, with the major religion was Christianity or Catholicism, and said it was Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember thinking, like, I'm literally surrounded by millions of people. It's such a busy city. And these are good people who, we even visited their temples. They seem just as passionate about their religion as I have been with mine. And yeah, all these people are going to hell. Just seeing it myself, like I'd always heard the arguments against why that may be true and we can believe in the Bible anyway, but actually being there face to face with these people, it really solidified for me like this is pretty ridiculous. But again, there was
Mm-hmm.
many things that led me to let go of it. But I forgot the last question.
No, that's okay. I'm gonna invite you to kind of bridge us to a last piece, and then I'm gonna go into the second question here. But I do want to say it's like it's almost like you're describing your faith expanded because where before the faith was in a teaching or a belief system around God, to now your faith encompasses a belief in humanity
Mm.
or humans or people. You tell me.
Well, initially I I abandoned faith altogether and I abandoned spirituality altogether because I was so hurt by the fact that I could believe something so strongly. Like I believed it to my core, and I was surrounded by so many people that believed it wholeheartedly, which made me think, well, it must be true. And yet it still wasn't true, even again after the literal schooling to teach me all the reasons why it was true. So I felt like I don't trust anybody. I don't think anybody knows. I don't trust myself either. And this universe talk is just way too weird and out there. That was what I had heard of outside of religion in regard to spirituality, people talking about the universe. And that was so different from the very personal God that I was raised with that I was like, that's just ridiculous. I'm not dealing with that either. And so I just really closed myself off to faith and spirituality and more just leaned into, yeah, what can we figure out as humans with what we have materially? Again, I've always been empathetic. I've always cared about people and wanted to help people, which is why, again, after that, I pursued being a therapist. But as far as like faith, I would say it was more about my focus shifted from caring so much about God and his opinion to, yes, caring about humans.
Mm-hmm.
Humanism is something that I really like and really identify with as I've explored
Mm-hmm.
more.
So kind of then bring us to, and then we are going to get to the other question. So now bring us to what brought you back to spirituality. You described very early for us that it's like I kind of left faith and then I came back to spirituality. Bridge that last part of the story for us.
So I think just with time, I was able to heal. I had my 4 years in the Christian university where I continued to feel like it was being pushed at me, like I wasn't safe to be open about what I really did think. And then, I left that school after I graduated. I went to grad school, I worked full time and just, getting accustomed to real life, adult life, all that. I think just having the distance maybe was a tool in helping me heal. And then just over the years, I think as my pain dulled, I was able to be curious even about that, because originally it felt so threatening that my curiosity was reserved for other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I would literally like emotionally put up a wall towards anything spiritual. But as I was less averse to it, as the pain dulled, I did become curious, and I stuck with my desire to, see evidence and whatnot. But, something that's interesting that happened even at the beginning of me doubting everything, I remember thinking, I think that spirituality is just science that we can't explain yet.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, I didn't feel safe to explore that because, again, there are elements of spirituality that can't be explained yet. If it couldn't be explained, I didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But again, as I felt less danger about exploring those ideas, I knew I could accept what I wanted, let go what I didn't feel aligned with me or didn't make sense to me. Again, that curiosity grew. And with that curiosity growing, it's interesting because although I'm not religious, it does pop up for me a lot of like religious sayings, because that's
Mm-hmm.
how most of my spiritual life has kind of played out. And so, the saying that comes to mind is like, my heart softened and I became more curious. So my dad, he didn't last long as an atheist. I think it was like 3 months maybe until he became spiritual, just not religious. And I still wanted nothing to do with anything he had to say, or anyone, not just him, but anyone around it. But, he's still my dad. And all these years I see him, I hang out with him, and he, again, likes to talk. The next preacher, Italian, all of that. So I would hear, about his experiences, what things he was learning. He's always on YouTube and that kind of thing. And usually I would just try to just let it go in one ear and out the other. But as I began to be curious and feel more open to it, I would process what he was saying more, let it digest more, do a little bit of my own research. But honestly, what led me to identify again as a spiritual person, it was getting curious again, and then being able to hear other people's experiences without that wall up.
Mm-hmm.
People who weren't religious but were spiritual, and even people who were religious of other religions. So one thing that I did, like in the time where I reconnected, was I listened to the audiobook of the book, An Autobiography of a Yogi. And what drew me into reading this book was that Steve Jobs, who created Apple, he had planned for his funeral for all of his guests to receive a copy. And he said that he wanted to tell all of his guests to read it not just once, but every year. And so that that felt a little safer to me because I'm like, okay, yeah, I know Steve Jobs was, I think, like Buddhist or something, but he was still very successful in physical world, and I'll give this book a chance. And this book actually kind of ties in Western
Mm.
spirituality with Eastern spirituality. So that was helpful for me too, like just being able to see what is consistent regardless of religious doctrine.
Hmm.
And then just some of my own experiences. I experienced some synchronicities, basically situations where things just kind of flowed and kept popping up, and it was just too weird to ignore.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just found myself thinking and feeling like I'm comfortable with spirituality now. I identify with spirituality now.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like, that curiosity served you because you came from a place of being very much a student and very much a studier. And then when life prompted you to challenge everything that you had studied and believed, then you were studying the alternatives. And then there was the exploring of alternatives. And what I'm hearing you describe is eventually, you didn't use the word patterns, but it sounds like you noticed patterns, you were observing, you had a critical eye, and then all of the evidence that you collected brought you to this next place. So,
Yeah. And something that's really amazing about the time we live in is that we're getting closer to that reality, in my opinion. And a lot of it is already proven reality that a lot of spiritual ideas now can be explained through science. So
mhm.
obviously that helped too. I mean, even things we know now, we didn't know 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, a mix of, my own experiences, hearing people's stories, and even just learning about all the science, um, definitely
Yeah.
helped.
So you have gone into so much depth with this on your story, and I love it. And I so appreciate the description. We have 4 questions left, and I feel like you've answered parts of these. So as I go through them, I'll invite you to add what hasn't already been included. And the second question is, as you look back on, you described 2 commas for us. Um, as you look back on these commas that you sat on, what did it create for you, or what has it now created for you?
It's the commas that I described have created my my sense of purpose ultimately. I
Mm.
don't think that purpose is something set in stone. Before my first comma, I thought all of our purpose was the same, to glorify God and help people not go to hell. And then after that, I felt like technically I don't have a predetermined purpose, but I was stubborn. And so I said, well, then I'm going to create my own purpose. I'm going to choose
Mhm.
my purpose, which I absolutely encourage and support anyone who wants to take that path. But I've come to a point after my second comma where I am feeling like kind of like the universe is guiding me towards, another specific purpose, which is why after, years of doing therapy and feeling like that was my calling, I still absolutely have a love for it, but I really think, my next steps are in this spiritual coaching.
Mm. Continuing evolving, continuing being curious, continuing exploring, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a natural segue into the next question, which is, what have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on these commas?
What I've learned about myself as a result of sitting on these commas, I would say, is just how capable I am, and I don't think I'm special in that. I think that we all have so much power and potential inside of us. Again, it was so hard to leave Christianity because I thought that was coming from something external. I thought that was coming from God and having the community of the church and all those different things. But what I've learned is we are all capable and powerful. Part of my spiritual beliefs now, I'll say, is that God is in all of us, and that, it's almost like we each have like a drop of the creator within us, so to speak. Like if God is an ocean, we're all a cup of water. And of course, we don't have those extensive powers, but there are extensive powers that we don't give ourselves enough credit for, such as, with our mindset, with our capacity of love and forgiveness. So both when I didn't have spirituality, seeing how much I could still achieve out of what I was told only came from God and religion. And then even now, having spirituality, but releasing religion, I'm seeing in myself even more about what I'm capable of, not just through my experience, but also the things I'm learning, as I said earlier, through what science is showing more and more about what we can do too.
One thing that came up for me earlier when you were talking about your earliest experiences with Christianity in the home, that really stands out now as you're describing kind of what you're learning about yourself is it seems like when you were talking about the benefits earlier that you received from your faith, I got the impression back then, and now it feels even more so, like in a way, when you were at the peak, you were already plugged into the essence that was the true intention of the faith to begin with. And it's reinforced now because now you're saying like any of us can tap into that. Those are my words, not yours, but you were already modeling it all the way back then.
I totally agree with that. Like I said, even about my reconnection to spirituality, something that helped me was seeing what's consistent, regardless of religion, regardless of, the time of history where that religion was very popular. There are certain things that are consistent. And I think, again, that's one reason why it was so hard for me to leave, because there was something real that I was connecting with, I believe. And even in my 10 years without spirituality, I can now look back and recognize that there were bits and pieces of that stayed with me, that did support me. And I'm not just talking about like synchronicities, but just like values and just like a feeling of connection, different things like that. But absolutely. I agree with what you said.
Yeah. Well, I love it because in everybody's story, there always seems to be this thread, this element that, pulls through the whole story and shows up and peaks, reveals itself. Anyway, it's just fun to watch those, especially when they really pop up as this did for me. Let's go to the fourth question. So, and again, you've kind of answered it, but add to this as you look back at the commas that you've sat on, what's changed for you as a result of sitting on these commas?
Absolutely, my sense of empowerment, because, even within religion, I felt empowered in the sense that I believed God was on my side. I was on God's side. I was on the right side, that kind of thing. And to be honest, in fundamentalist religion, any religion within Christianity that declares that, the Bible is the word of God and we need to follow the Bible, there is a lot of suppression of women. And so even though I actually was so ingrained in it all that I saw it as like good in the long run, that women would be submissive and the helpmeet and, not the leader, but the encourager and that kind of thing. Being outside of that, I'm more empowered. But even being spiritual again after the second comma, there is another level of empowerment that comes from that connection to believing that we are more than just material. So absolutely more empowerment has been what's come from it.
That is like a resounding statement. We are more than just material. And I've also heard women in my life talk about we are not just vessels. And obviously, as I listen to my environment, there's so many other ways to describe this same point, which is we are so much more. That is just really profound to say that. Um, and quite frankly, to self-reference and to insert an opinion, like it just
Mhm.
blows my mind that we can live in a world where anyone, particularly of the male gender, can look on women as something less than when that's exactly where life comes from. I mean, we don't need to, that's a whole other episode, isn't it?
That's a need. Thank you, though.
Okay. Last of the 5 questions, Michela. What does getting off the comma look like for you?
Honestly, thinking about my first comma, getting off that comma was making a decision. Again, ultimately, it was a decision because since it was such a positive thing for me, I fought and held on so hard. I could talk a whole podcast just about that, but ultimately I decided that I can't do this, and I let it go, and I figured myself out and figured out life without it. With the second comma, getting off of it, it was less of a decision and more of just being open. Being open is what allowed me to get off that comma of just, being curious and just kind of exploring, is spirituality actually going to be a part of my life? Is this something that is going to be something that I'm going to embrace or not? In therapy, there is something called the self-care wheel. It's a tool. And, we have like our physical self-care, our emotional self-care, and there's a little wedge of the wheel that's spiritual self-care. And I remember, like you said earlier, everyone needs, a therapist or a coach or can benefit from one. My therapist had sent that to me. And I remember feeling upset. Like, I don't need spirituality. I can be fine without it.
Enough already.
But, being open to it, I think is what helped me get through that and be able to, again, embrace this new level of empowerment. No, now, not only can I be empowered to know that I'm just as valuable and equal to someone of the opposite gender, but I have an empowerment of knowing that there is more than just the material, and there is still an element of support and love beyond just what I might be able to experience, with my physical body in this moment, in this room. There is more that we can access.
I love that, especially that. That's a great place to kind of end the story. There's more that we can access. And I also hear from you that when you say being opened, what you're also describing is being curious and being okay to ask questions. That's been the theme throughout. Michela, thank you for sharing this story with us. And, as we look at the folks who are listening right now, where can people find you? Somebody wants to look you up, maybe contact you, find out what you're doing. I'll put all the links in the show notes, obviously, but walk us through kind of where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on pretty much all social media, Facebook, Twitter, not Twitter. Twitter doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. My profile is Michela's Mind Munchies, and they can find me there. And I would love to connect. Again, this is my passion, especially if you have religious trauma, but even if you're simply curious about spirituality, if you're coming maybe from materialism, that's where I was for 10 years. I would love to connect.
Okay. And last thing before we wrap up, we do this in every episode. I believe it's a very important part of your story, and it supports what we stand for on the podcast. And that is, we're a community of storytellers. We take inspiration from everyday people's stories, and everybody can kind of access what is going to resonate for them. And it's a place to lift up other folks. And so as you look at your own circle, we call this acknowledgments. Who within your circle would you like to give a voice to, boost, lift up? And that can be organizations, causes, other creators, people in your family, whomever. Who would you like to acknowledge today?
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge a place that's actually within the area that I live. I'm in the Houston area, and it's called Carmel Temple, and it's a place where you can go regardless of your faith, your spiritual beliefs, to still have access to community of people who aren't going to judge, who are willing to look at all the information out there. There's also an organization called Uplift Kids, which is really beautiful because it provides resources that you tend to only find if you take your kids to church and Sunday school and that kind of thing without any doctrine involved. It's material to kind of
Mm.
help kids learn to connect to their intuition and figure out their sense of morality and all those beautiful things that sometimes we don't know how to navigate without religion, but isn't actually necessary for.
Mm.
And then I also mentioned that this is actually something that I created, but I do have a Facebook group called Unbound Faith. It's rediscovering spirituality after religion, something of the sort, but it's called Unbound Faith. And so it's another resource for connecting and building community if you're interested in spirituality outside of religion.
Wonderful. And I love, this pathways to continue to pursue spiritual connection without having to fit within a particular framework, right? Or dogma or doctrine or what have you. Thank you for sharing those. That will all be in the show notes, complete with links. So definitely encourage folks to look these up, even if you're not in the Houston area. And if you're not in the Houston area, find organizations similar to that in your neighborhood as well. So Michela, I thank you again for all that you've shared with us today and for opening up for us. It is always a pleasure, and I will look forward to staying connected with you as well. And have a wonderful end to your week.
Thank you so much. You as well. It's been such a pleasure.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.